Okay, welcome to another Top Grades Made Easy video with Mr. Salles. We are staring at Macbeth and it is the extract question. So the first problem that students have is that the extract actually leads you to get lower marks. So my experience reading loads of exam answers is that students who start with the extract, which is of course what you're told to do, starting with this speech look, but pupils who start with the extract tend to get lower marks. Why is that? Well, it's because they have very little to say about the play as a whole, and what they do say about the play as a whole feels kind of random. But to get the top marks, you can't be random. You need to write a coherent argument. So, at this point in the play, Macbeth is thinking of his feelings about Banquo. I'm going to put a box around Banquo so that I know which character's involved. Obviously, it's going to be Macbeth. And what am I going to be focusing on? The feelings that Macbeth has towards Banquo. That's super important. I'm not going to read the extract yet. I want to know what the question is before I read the extract. So I have to explore how Shakespeare presents Macbeth's fears. So not Banquo's fears, but Macbeth's fears. Okay, so my key word here, the one I'm going to pay loads of attention to, is fears, because that's what I'm going to be looking for here. How does Shakespeare present means anything at all about what we discover about Macbeth's fears and why he has them. So why is he afraid? And the how, so there's always a how in this question. The how always means methods. Now, this doesn't have to be named methods, yeah? So let's have a look at what a named method might be. It might be a metaphor, right? So you might have a metaphor, you'll spot it and you give that a big tick. Yes, I've got a named method. But he might be trying to surprise us. And as long as you suggest to the examiner, Shakespeare is trying to surprise us by, that will then become a method. Yes, so anything that the writer does, and here obviously the writer is Shakespeare, anything that the writer does is a method. Let's start reading. When I'm reading, I'm going to be looking for methods and fears, okay? That's going to be my first reading. To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. So obviously, if he's worried about not being safe, that is a fear. Our fears in Banquo stick deep. Oh, obviously, everyone in the universe is going to quote that. This is a note about bullfighting, which I'm not going to use later on, so I'll just fast forward. And in his royalty of nature. Okay, so he's also afraid about Banquo's royalty, how noble Banquo is, but also how good he is. That's what royalty of nature means. Reigns that which would be feared. So he thinks that perhaps Banquo is going to damage him because Banquo is good. Perhaps he's imagining that Banquo will decide to get rid of Macbeth because Macbeth is evil. Well, let's keep reading. "'Tis much he dares." Okay, so he thinks that Banquo is up to something now. So Banquo is being clever. He's being secret because he's not letting Macbeth know what he's up to. And there's a word which we always use when we're writing about Macbeth, Machiavellian, having a cunning secret plan. So Macbeth thinks that Banquo has got some great plan that is dangerous to him, and we know it's great because he's daring. "And to that dauntless temper of his mind, he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour." So I'm guessing most students won't know what dauntless temper is, and they might panic. I don't panic. I say, oh, I don't know what that is. Therefore, I'm just going to ignore it. He hath a wisdom, so he is scared that Banquo might succeed in his daring plan because he's wise. that doth guide his valour to act in safety. So here's Macbeth's other problem, is that Banquo is wise and clever and has avoided doing anything in public that means Macbeth can accuse him. So Banquo feels safe in what he's up to. There is none but he whose being I do fear. Well, obviously the keyword fear is there, so I've got to write about that. And I'm going to emphasise none but he. Banquo is the scariest person in Scotland, which is a kind of bizarre sort of image, according to Macbeth. And under him, my genius is rebuked. So Macbeth feels he's arrogant, he thinks he's a genius. So that's interesting because the witches gave him this prophecy, but he still thinks he's being given the role of king because he's a genius. But he feels inferior to Banquo, and that's why his genius is rebuked. As it is said, Mark Antony's was by Caesar. So we've got some context here which I'm going to write about. I know that Mark Antony avenged Caesar's death and then became ruler himself. So that is a bit of foreshadowing. So I'm going to have this here, foreshadowing that Macbeth is also going to be killed. He chid the sisters when they first put the name of king upon me and bade them speak to him. Then, prophet-like, they hailed him father to a line of kings. So this is the big one. He's really upset with Banquo because Banquo's sons are going to become kings. So he's jealous, but he's also fascinated by the idea of legacy. It's not enough for Macbeth to be king. He wants his children to be kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown and put a barren sceptre in my grip. So what he's most upset about here, if I pick on the word barren and fruitless, is that he is childless. So Macbeth has got no children who are going to become kings. In fact, his child has just died. Thence to be wrenched by an unlineal hand, I'm going to ignore that, no son of mine succeeding. Well, we've already got that with the language here. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind. So I'm guessing filed must mean defiled, as in made dirty, and he's made his mind dirty. That's a hint of madness, but it's also guilt. And he's disgusted with himself because he seems to have done that for Banquo's children, not for his own. And for them, the gracious Duncan have I murdered, put rancors in the vessel of my peace, only for them and mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man. So this is a metaphor for Satan, the devil, who is the common enemy of man. And this is another metaphor for his soul. That's his eternal jewel that he sacrificed, giving it to Satan for these pleasures that he'll have in life. But the pleasures won't be long lasting because Banquo's sons are going to become king. To make them kings, the seeds of Banquo kings. So I've got lots of repetition here, which is another method. And the repetition suggests his anger and his jealousy that everything he's done is actually going to reward Banquo's kids. Rather than so, come fate into the list. So what I know with list here is that it is the running order for a joust. You know that bit where the knights charge at each other and try to knock each other off the horse? Well, that is the list, and he believes he's going to fight fate, and he believes he's going to win. And champion me to the utterance. Who's there? So this also might be fear, mightn't it, that question? Okay, let's look at the number of methods that I've got so far. So I've got this metaphor, I've got that metaphor, I've got repetition. Let's go back over the other things that I've made a note on and see which one is a method. So Mark Antony and Caesar, that is an allusion. Yeah, so referring to something else that the audience is supposed to know about, that is an allusion, an historical allusion, so I'm going to be able to use that. Our fears in Banquo stick deep. That is going to be another metaphor. So that is another method. Under him, my genius is rebuked. So being underneath Banquo, despite the fact that he is king, that is another metaphor. So I'm just going to put met here for short. And this is going to be another method that we can write about. This language about a fruitless crown and a barren sceptre, they are also metaphors. So I can see not only that I've got lots of methods, but that actually Shakespeare is obsessed with the same ones. Now I really want to write about the beginning. To be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. In my first reading, I went with the word safely. Now, safely is an adverb, but I'm not going to have that as a method. That's always a lame method. What's really popping out to me now is the repetition of thus. So I've got repetition again, and thus refers to him being king, but not feeling safe yet as king. And then at the ending, of course, we had this gorgeous idea of the joust, and he's going to joust with fate. That's another metaphor, but a joust is something that only people can do, and so this is also personification. So I now know what methods I'm going to write about. I'm not going to use every idea here. I am going to use the bits that have got methods in them. That's obvious because that's going to give me the how, that's going to give me higher marks. And I've just spotted another method, which is the foreshadowing through the allusion to the historical context. Okay, now in order to get the second part of the question, to write about the play as a whole, I'm going to have to link these to things that happen elsewhere in the play. And to do that, I'm going to think about the beginning of the play, and the middle of the play, and of course, the end of the play. Why would I do that? Well, by dealing with these three parts of the play, I'm going to show the examiner that I've dealt with the play as a whole. Yeah, that's what they want me to do. And so this is the easiest way for me to do it. What happens at the beginning of the play that links to this? Well, they hailed him a father to a line of kings. That's when they first met the witches. So that is going to be point number one. Right, how am I going to link that to fear? Do you remember when Banquo looked at him and said, our friend seems to start and fear, and he's lost within his own thoughts? You might not remember the exact quote in the exam, and that doesn't matter. You're going to reference Macbeth imagines killing Duncan and is afraid, okay? So I know I'm going to link number one to that idea there. Okay, under him, my genius is rebuked. So that was a metaphor which I could mention. Does that remind me of anything? Yes, it's a contrast for me. So he feels like a genius now, but what happens at the end? Well, he sees himself as a poor player, and we have that quote about life being a tale told by an idiot, signifying nothing. And I've already pre-learnt the word that I'm going to use about that, which is nihilism or nihilism, depending on how you pronounce it. So I know that that's going to be something I need to write about, and that's going to be a contrast with his genius. So the genius bit is going to be number two, and this will be number two. I'm going to mention the end of the play at that stage. Where else am I going to write about the end of the play? Well, when he's killed. Who's he killed by? He's killed by Macduff. Can I link that to this metaphor here? Yes, I can, because Macduff is his fate. So we've got the witches' prophecies. We know that no man of woman born can harm Macbeth. And then, of course, he says, "Despair thy charm, for I was from my mother's womb untimely ripped." Okay, so that is going to link perfectly to the idea of fate. So at this stage of the play, he thinks that he's going to challenge fate and win, but by the end of the play, he absolutely knows that he can't win. And fate has beaten him, tricked him about no man being able to kill him, when actually Macduff is that very man. Okay, when I look at my highlighted bits, there's only one other quote that reminds me of something else in the play, and it's the fruitless crown and the barren scepter, which deals with him being childless. The most famous quote about his child is Lady Macbeth saying that she would dash his brains out, or its brains out, had she so promised as Macbeth did. Now, you might not be able to remember that quote accurately. The examiners don't care. So I know that dashed is correct, and I know that brains out is correct. And I think it's dashed its brains out, so I'm going to put that in there. Dashed its brains out, had I so promised as you. I'm not quite confident about that, so I'm just going to put here the promise bit so that I know I'm going to write about that. And this links me to the motive. This is one motive for why Macbeth has become so violent, because he fears he will always be childless. Now, there is another mega event in the middle that this leads to, and the examiners are always super keen for you to say, well, what happens before and after this speech? And the major thing that happens after this is that he decides to kill Banquo, so that's going to be major. I'm going to write about that. And we can also say that he fears killing Banquo himself, which is why he hires murderers to do it. What fear does that lead to? Well, it leads to Banquo's ghost. "Never shake thy gory locks at me, thou canst not say I did it." Now, in the real exam, I don't have time to plan this much. So these ideas here are going to occur to me as I'm writing about the extract. I would write down these three words, beginning, middle and end, to make sure in particular that I get something from the beginning and something from the end, because that's going to give me the play as a whole. But I would write about these other points from elsewhere in the play as I move through the extract. I've shown you how these ideas came from the quotes that are highlighted. And so what would happen is you'd write about the highlighted quote, and then you would say, how does that link to something else in the play, especially from the beginning and the end, or the middle? And once you get there, you would write about it. So just to be clear, this bit is your planning. This bit is me just demonstrating what my thinking would be. I wouldn't write this plan because there isn't time in the exam. If any of you want to write this essay and put it in the comments, I will mark it for you. Unless that essay doesn't include the ideas that I've given you, because then what's the point? You're just taking the mick. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to write about an extract, but without starting with that extract.